I read this week that you remember how your parents used to tell you when you're watching TV, don't watch that stuff, it'll rot your brain. Apparently that's true. Yeah, watching television is one of the leading contributors to dementia. So I figure my timeline is very short. And one of those shows that rots your brain, have you ever seen Hoarders? Every hour-long episode has two people that are on the verge of a personal crisis. And it's all caused by the fact that they are unable to part with even the tiniest of possessions. And when you watch the episode, you can see it bear out. Their houses are full of junk. Like several episodes, you can't even get in the front door. There's the whole house, there's just a path that goes like from the front door to maybe a lounge chair in the living room, then back out, and then in the kitchen, the bathroom, and maybe a bed. Everything else is junk piled up. We're talking newspapers, sacks that they get stuff in, like Walmart sacks. I mean, the cumulative effect of all of this is just mountains of garbage, and it overtakes the home, the apartment. It'll bleed out into their yards. And they'll have cars out in the yard. They'll have all kinds of just trinkets and gadgets and doo-doos. And I went to a student's house one time and had to take him home, and he needed to fix something real quick, and he needed a crescent wrench. So he got out of the car, and I saw him make a beeline over. It was just kind of out in the middle of the yard, and he bent down and reached down, picked up a crescent wrench, and come back. And I said, "You just keep crescent wrenches in the yard?" And that's kind of the hoarder. These people, the people on this show, have a lifestyle of holding on to what they have, and they come face to face with the reality of their problem. And of course, there's an intervention that takes place. They have their loved ones that bring them in and try to set them down and make them come to the realization that what they're doing is a problem. Then they encourage them and help them clean out the stuff, and they bring those big rollaways into their front yard, and people empty their houses into them. And eventually it's like they'll even make the statement, "Oh, I just feel so much more free." And then they do the episodes where they go back and check on them, and they've already got the living room full again. It's really a habitual mental illness. It's really classified as a mental illness. And so I watched the show with utter fascination. In the back of my mind, I mean, if I'm honest, it hits a little close to home. Now, I'm not a hoarder. I would call myself more a micro hoarder, if you will. I save pretty much everything. My wife will pick up like an electrical cord and say, "What does this go to?" And I'll say, "I don't know, but I may need it one day. Don't throw it away." And you go to my house, you go down to my basement, I got boxes of bicycle parts for BMX bikes that I had whenever I was a teenager. You go up in my attic, I have old electronic equipment. I've got old speakers. Remember back in the day, you didn't have those little satellite speakers in your living room. You had these like monster things, look like they've come from a Guns N' Roses rock show. I've still got those. And you know what else I have that goes along with those things? I have VHS tapes and VCRs. I found the other day some cassette singles. For you younger kids that don't know what that is, a cassette single's a cassette tape. It's only got one song on one side and one song on the other. It's about a 3-minute cassette. And they were fantastic. You could buy them for about $2, 50 cents, $3. But I got a whole bunch of those. And last night I was piddling around and I actually found this. Look at this trinket. This is a little trinket I got here. Look at that. How about that, all right? I found that in a little storage box next to my computer. I don't know where it come from, but man, I hate to throw it away. You never know. It could come in handy. I went up in the attic the other day and got to looking around, and I've got a box. Back when we was in the trucking business, we used to haul for the government. And we used to haul things like camouflage BDUs, government-issued battle dress uniforms. We ended up with an overage of a case of BDU pants, camouflage pants that like soldiers wear. And I've still got them. I got a whole case of them. And I can't part with them. Now, I'll be honest, I haven't been a size 32 since 1996, but still, okay? I keep them because you never know. One day they might be handy. I look at my grandma and she's shrinking. I'm thinking it's going to happen to me. I can start wearing those camos. They've got some incredible pockets on the side, and you can keep little trinkets in it. And anyway, that's what it means to be a hoarder. And sometimes I think that I do that stuff because I get a sense of security, a sense of safety, a sense of, there's a lot of things. Anybody keep old trophies or newspaper clippings? We keep those little trinkets for significance. That's where we're at to this week. The past 2 weeks I've been talking about this God-shaped hole that exists in our hearts. It's that restless longing that we have, that all men have, in fact, and we are desperate to fill it. It was a hole that was designed by God to draw us to God. And if you want to really spiritually state this truth, you would say that we are designed and created to worship something greater than ourselves. And so we're always looking to whatever it is that fits that little slot in our heart, and we want to worship it. And so that's that God-shaped hole. Now, the truth is, sin has corrupted us. Every single one of us deal with sin. And now, instead of the restless longing drawing us to God like it's supposed to, we're drawn to anything but God, because our restless longing looks for things that it will even consider corruptible things. And so we replace what should be there, that incorruptible God, we replace it with a corruptible counterfeit God, which is an idol. Now, whenever I say the word idols, and we've used the word idols all morning this morning, if you're like me, I immediately begin to think about like little Buddha statues or little trinkets that people have that they would pray to, or we kind of have this image of an evil demonic statue or the worship of pagan deities. And that's true. That still exists in many parts of the world. Not so much true here in America. In our contemporary civilization, idolatry is much more sophisticated and subtle. We aren't necessarily worshiping evil, demonic, or pagan deities. I'm not going to go into your house and find a shrine to Buddha. But the truth is, our idols are made up of what we would often call good things. And idols are really a matter of priorities. You realize that God knows your heart. God created you. He knows what you're like. He knows what your tendencies are. And that's super important, because He gives us some instructions in how to navigate through that in our life. In the book of Exodus, He gives the 10 Commandments, and the very first commandment is against idolatry. So if you would think, He's talking about the very most important things that you and I should know. Number one deals with idolatry. And it says, "You shall have no other gods before me." He's communicating to you and I have to be first. I must be the most important thing in your life. I will not play second fiddle to anyone. And so I want to take that idea and just kind of shrink it down for just a second so that it's a little bit easier for you to digest. Maybe this makes a little bit more sense in your terminology. Idolatry is just really a matter of priorities and affections, if you will. It's a very simple concept to understand, and that is anytime something or someone is more important to you than God is, that's an idol. Anytime your life, if you would sit down and write the most important things, make a list of those things, anytime something is number one other than the name of God, you have yourself an idol. Now, be sure, you need to understand this. God is a jealous God. He is not going to be second fiddle. He's not going to be the girlfriend on the side or the boyfriend on the side. He demands exclusive allegiance to Him. But He's also a wise and loving God as well. And He knows what turns your eye. He knows what draws your affection. He knows what competes for your devotion. And so that's the reason why He warns us about that. And I got to thinking, if we know all of this, and this is the third week you've heard me say this, you're like, okay, we get it by now, Jason. You've beat this drum. If we know this, why do we still choose to make good things God things? Why do we do that? And here's the reason why. Idols are liars. And they make all kinds of promises. And there's three main promises that idols make to you and I. And we interpret these idols as being able to fulfill these promises. And number one is the promise of security, and the promise of significance, and the promise of salvation. So think about it just for a second. What keeps you up at night? What is running through your head that's preventing you from falling asleep? What's your brain chewing on? What consumes your thoughts? What is the motivation for you to get up in the morning? And then, of course, I asked this question a couple weeks ago. What scares you to death to even consider the potential that you might lose it? For most of us, I think the answer to that question is money. I know it is true for me. Just being honest. Money is quite possibly the single most powerful concern that we have. And I think it's probably an even more powerful concern than your personal health. You prioritize money even over your personal health because at the end of the day, if you got money, you just pay to get healthy. Right? And I know this is the low-hanging fruit you've expected me to beat you up with since we announced idolatry. I mean, it is. It's that low-hanging fruit. And so I do not have you in particular in mind while I'm preaching, okay? I know inevitably somebody's going to come up and say, were you thinking about me when you were preaching, Or they're thinking, okay, in his preparation for this, he was probably imagining, no. I'm just following the scriptures where they go. If you got your study guides, look at number 1 here. Number 1 on your study guide. Greed is a form of idolatry. Greed is also, you can also define greed as the love of money. And I just want to challenge you to be honest for just a moment. Doesn't the thoughts about money or income or wealth, do they not dominate your thoughts? I mean, if you don't have to raise your hand, you don't have to come to me afterwards, and I don't have a confessional booth in my office, But doesn't money dominate your thought life? I mean, every decision, anytime you have to make a decision, isn't money the first consideration you think about? I think that's true for most of us. Doesn't money determine how you live and where you live and what you live on? Doesn't money kind of dictate how you spend your time? I mean, I can't be alone in this. Surely somebody in here has daydreamed about what it would be like to have enough money to where you didn't have to ever work again. I do, all the time. And so, if all of the idols that we will talk about through these 4 weeks, and all of the idols that we could possibly have in our lives, I really believe money is the loudest and most appealing idol that we can find ourselves attached to. It is the one powerful source that will seek and steal our attention and devotion. And in America, we have this propensity to kind of build our lives around wealth, don't we? I mean, the dollar bill is probably the number one god in America. Because, and here's the reason why, we are utterly convinced that money can make good on those 3 promises. Number 1, I mean, think about it. Think about security. Having money or having wealth, possessing wealth, it promises to provide us with comfort and safety. Having money means that we have control of our life. And don't you feel much more comfortable knowing that you've got that little nest egg back there? From the time we are born, right, our parents are saying you need to save, you need to start getting that little nest egg together because we're convinced that it provides some sort of security to us, almost like a safety net. And so money then becomes a priority as we're trying to build that so that we have some security. But money also provides us with a little bit of a idea of significance. We tie our identity to our wealth. And subliminally, now you may not overtly think about this, but in the back of your mind, I'm sure it occurs to you, and maybe you even have begun to believe that you are defined by the world by how much you own or how much you consume. It's just real subtle. It's there in the back of your mind. And we also think about, with regard to significance, I mean, we often buy into the lie that our financial worth is determining what our personal worth is like, our value as a human being. And then you think about salvation. Money promises to rescue us from the mundane and unfulfilling life. If you have money, you can travel the world and you can experience life to the fullest. And then, of course, there's that issue of philanthropy. Noble, admirable, but money and wealth convinces people that just by donating large sums of money, you can somehow buy your way into salvation. You've heard of John D. Rockefeller, haven't you? John D. Rockefeller is actually a Baptist. I didn't know that until this week. He's a Baptist. And he was the American oil magnate who started Standard Oil in 1870. One of the richest people in the world at that time. And it's stated that in 1911, Rockefeller was actually worth about $900 million. In today's money, that's about $24 billion. And that's a lot of money at that time. And he was a great philanthropist. I mean, he used his wealth to fund a variety of different charitable causes, like in healthcare and education and research. Did you know the University of Chicago was founded as a Baptist college, a religious institution, and it was funded by Rockefeller? Today, it's a shell of itself. It's more liberal than anything else. But as a businessman, Rockefeller was thought to be extremely ruthless and exploitative. I mean, he was cutthroat. He had a monopoly, and he would use it to crush his competition. He would simply just not sell any oil or buy any oil, playing with the fluctuation in the oil price. And as the price of oil would go down, he'd buy it all up, and he'd hoard it. And he'd sit on it until the price went back up, and he could sell it at a profit. I mean, when you got a lot of money, you can kind of do that. You can influence the markets. And he would use his wealth to influence government policy as well. He'd pay off politicians. And he would wine and dine them so that they would pass legislation that was beneficial to him and his organization. In his later years, Rockefeller's wealth was growing faster than he could spend it. And he actually was partnered with a Baptist pastor by the name of Frederick Gates. And he had asked Mr. Gates, would you help me to set up some charities and do some philanthropy work? Help me organize that and determine where I'm going to give my money away. Well, I don't have any clue if this is true or not. I mean, I don't have any clue what his motivation was or is, but his critics would often level the accusation at Rockefeller that he was just simply doing all of these charitable donations, attempting to buy forgiveness for the way that he had earned the money. Now, I don't know that's true. I'm not making that accusation at him. I'm just telling you what his peers thought. That's what wealth does. Somehow, everybody's claiming that Rockefeller believed that he could act this way and do these things, and then in the future just give back money to churches and hospitals and things like that and earn God's love. Jesus denounces a life that is focused on the accumulation of wealth and more. He condemns hoarding. He condemns gaining and stockpiling riches. And here's the reason why, because when we in order for us to be able to do that, it requires that we devote all of our affection and all of our attention and all of our focus and live in pursuit of those things. Here's what Jesus said, and it's in Luke 12:15. He says, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." And that's coming from the man that is going to measure you. And he's saying, if you think that you're somebody's because you have something, I'm going to be the ultimate determiner of that. Turn over to Matthew chapter 6. I want you to look at verses 19 through 21. In Matthew 6, another passage, here's what Jesus had to say about wealth. He says, "Don't store up treasures here on earth, where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be." In those few verses, Jesus is actually teaching what a true disciple will do. And he points out the insanity of idolizing wealth. And in those few verses, he's just saying, don't worship money. Don't try to accumulate material things and wealth because, and here's what he says, they're temporary. That's the point he's making. Don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them. Money, wealth, stuff, when that is your idol, you're actually worshiping something that is not going to last. These things have a shelf life, don't they? They can be corrupted, they can deteriorate, they can be lost, they can be stolen. I mean, how heartbroken would I be if I knew somebody stole my Michael Jackson cassette single? You know, and even if somehow, some way you manage to even hold on to those things, preserve those things until someday you're going to die. And you're going to be separated from it. Ultimately, everything that you've worked for, everything you've pursued, everything you've devoted your life to, someone else is going to get it. And somebody else is going to blow it. And somebody else is going to let it be deteriorated or rot. And, you know, all those trophies that you gain or all of your bank account, eventually it's just going to be depleted. I don't even really know how much money the Rockefeller Foundation has right now, but he has given away so much of it, and his kids have eaten so much of it up. I don't really even know if there's a whole lot there anymore. But Jesus is saying here, in contrast to those perishable things, he's saying, worship me. Pursue me. Because the rewards of doing so are eternal. Worshiping Jesus, when you do it right, it will lead to godly behavior, and that godly behavior produces good works. And those good works are our eternal reward in heaven. And that is something that will never deteriorate. It will never be lost, it will never be stolen, and it can be enjoyed for eternity. And so if that's true, and maybe you don't understand where you're at or where the status of your heart is or who's on the throne of your heart, and if you have any questions as to whom you are worshiping, Jesus gives instructions for that. He says, just, where's your treasure? Just think about what dominates your life. The location of your treasure is where your heart is located, where all of your affection is. And so the thing that you value, wherever that is, and whatever that is, whether it be money, wealth, possessions, ultimately you'll see that all of your devotion and all of your focus and attention will be set on those things. That's how you identify whether or not those are an idol. However, a true disciple of Jesus is going to have a singular devotion. You know how they put blinders on horses, right? I'm allergic to horses, so I'm going off what somebody's told me, okay? But you put those blinders on horses so that they can't see everything that's going on around them. That's kind of the idea here. You have to be singularly devoted to Jesus. Your heart must be set on pleasing Him. And that your passions have to be a mirror image of Jesus' passions. And you should long for nothing but His presence. And when you do that, you will begin to lose your appetite for things of this world. Now, jump down real quick, Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. Here's what he says. No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. He's saying, of course, you can't have two masters. The question that I began to think about is, and that I wanted to ask you is, where's your heart? To whom do you bow to? Divided allegiance and divided loyalty in the kingdom is absolutely impossible. You cannot be a citizen of the kingdom of God and then devote half of your heart to the pursuit of wealth. You cannot worship two kings. You can't have two commanders. You cannot worship two gods. One master always will come out on top. And if you choose money as your master, Jesus is telling us, you'll quickly learn that the love of money will gradually increase the demands from you over time. So the amount of loyalty that you're given to money, if that's what you're devoting your life to, as time goes on, that demand will grow. And those idols demand more and more of us if you want to keep what you love. And so it makes it ever more increasingly difficult to demand or to deny its demand on your attention. And so that actually leads to kind of my second point, if you're taking notes there, and that is the fact that your work or career can actually become an idol. I mean, this particular idol works hand in hand with wealth, doesn't it? Because those fallacious promises to provide for our security, significance, and salvation, they convince us that the more wealth we have, the greater sense of these things will be. So, i.e., if I have more wealth, I will have more security, I'll have more significance, I'll have a greater sense of salvation. Because of that, it's a self coming, it's a self, I don't know what the word I'm going to use, but it's a prophecy that finds itself coming truer and truer and truer, self-fulfilling. Thank you, Ben. And so if I have more wealth, I'll have more of that. And if I want more of that, I'll have to endeavor to accumulate more and more and more. Now, it really doesn't take a rocket scientist to recognize that the only way to accumulate more money is to work more. We all know that. And so that's what happens is work begins to demand more and more of your devotion and attention. We look to our work for security, don't we? I mean, in our jobs, having a steady income, a steady job, it shields us from the ups and downs of life. We look at work as our security because it provides a reliable source of income, a continuous string of income. It's the path to a comfortable life, our work is. And so we also look to our work for significance. I mean, we measure our self-value by the work that we do. And we measure our worth by the amount of success that we achieve in our work. I mean, a higher position in your workplace is associated with greater respect and admiration, and that a prestigious career, it somehow shields you from judgment. Significance in our work is found in the praise of men. We love it when we're recognized for a job well done, or that we have some sort of notoriety because we're at the top of our industry, or we receive all of these accolades for lifetime achievements. And just the fact that you hold a particular position or there's a title attached to your name, I mean, that there's influence and power that goes along with that. So it feeds into our sense of significance. And so when work is your God, ultimately it will begin to demand all of your time, and all of your passion and all of your effort will go into pleasing that idol. And that is a very precarious situation to find yourself in. Because what happens if you get laid off? What happens if you get fired? What happens if your employer goes out of business? If you're self-employed, what happens if the economy takes a downturn and the bank calls your note? hey, there's only one of you, okay? That's super important because you only have so much time, you only have so much energy, you have only so much effort, and if you're continually pouring it into the pursuit of doing better work, more work, it's going to result in burnout. You're going to have broken marriages and rebellious children and warped relationships. Eventually, your health is going to become a concern. Your nerves, depression, things like that. It's going to cause you to neglect your spiritual life, the demands of working on Sundays or foregoing mission trips because you can't get off work or you don't want to take off work or whatever. And so you're going to have all these missed opportunities. Here's what Paul has to say about that. Paul says, work willingly at whatever you do as though you are working for the Lord rather than people. Now, I want to be clear. We should absolutely work hard and do our best in whatever we do. We should not be lazy. We shouldn't be careless about our work. And we should never work solely for the applause of men. But you need to understand, your work and your career is not the most important thing in life. And any time you think that it's going to bring you some sort of personal security or significance, that means that is now your idol. And idols never fully satisfy our longing, that restless longing. Now, since both money and work continue to promise those things, they immediately jump to the top of the list. And so I just want to give you a little tip, a little reminder, because I'm sure that as you think about the power that money has and wealth and work, if you're like me, I begin to think of those things really do have a real effective power over us, especially here in America. How do we move beyond that? How do we overcome that desire to idolize these juggernauts? Because we always will have to deal with them. They're always a part of our conversations. Well, the secret is you really have to begin with the right understanding and the application of your true value as a human being. I mean, embed these truths in your soul. And number one truth I want you to embed is the fact that you were bought with a price. 1 Peter 1 says, you know that God paid a ransom to save you from the empty life you inherited from your ancestors. It was not paid with mere gold or silver, which lose their value. It was the precious blood of Christ, the spotless Lamb of God. And God chose him as your ransom long before the world began, but now in these last days, he has been revealed for your sake. You've been bought with a price. And the second thing I want you to realize and understand in this whole economy of salvation is that Jesus actually gave up the treasures of heaven so that he could make you his treasure. 2 Corinthians 8 says this, you know the generous grace our Lord Jesus Christ. He was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty he could make you rich. If you're in Christ, you're already rich. And not only that, but the work that Jesus did secured for us an eternal inheritance, far more valuable than anything this world offers. Ephesians 1 says, because we are united with Christ, we have received an inheritance from God. And this inheritance is our reward for refusing to have any other gods in front of him. Colossians 3 says, remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward, and that the master you are serving is Christ. That's a reminder there. If you want your eternal reward, inheritance in heaven, Christ has to be your master. And that inheritance, it's not like anything here on this planet. It won't corrode, it won't rust. 1 Peter 1:4 actually says it's being kept safe and sound. It says we have a priceless inheritance, an inheritance that is kept in heaven for you, pure and undefiled beyond the reach of change and decay. And so in light of all of this, thinking about the economy of salvation and how we tend to gravitate towards money and work, in light of all of this, I mean, can't you see how short-sighted and foolish it is to idolize these things. There's no need for us to look to wealth and work for security, significance, and salvation, because Christ has already accomplished that and given it to you in spades. Jesus' love and His salvation, it confers upon you a status that money could never buy. And when you truly come to term with Christ's payment for you, what happens is, wealth and work, they kind of begin to lose their luster a little bit. And they no longer hold you hostage to their demands, and they don't have any dominion over you. So this morning, the call of action that I'd like you to take this morning, the next step, I just want you to honestly evaluate and then confess what you're devoted to. And then out of that, begin to set down, even if you have to take a piece of paper and write it down, begin to reorientate your priorities. And maybe you'll realize that Christ isn't number one priority anymore, that He is no longer on the throne of your heart. But whenever you begin to reorganize those priorities and put Christ back in His place, it demotes and it devalues what wealth and work offer. And when you do so, all of that power and allure that wealth and work have over us as Americans, it begins to fade in the distance. Let's pray. Lord, your word pricks the very heart of my soul. Lord, because I will recognize that I come across decisions all the time, situations in my own life, where I am posed, even though I don't know the questions being asked. I don't hear it verbally, audibly. But the question still remains, who will I serve? Who will I show my deepest affection and all of my attention to? And Lord, I fail the test. Time and time again, I fail the test because there is such a powerful draw to solving our problems and finding significance and security in wealth and work. Father, would you forgive me for that? Would you help me to do better? Would you remind me in those moments, those quick little moments where I'm presented with that choice? Lord, would you just remind me of what you had to do in order to adopt me as a child? The price that was paid for me and the inheritance that awaits me. Lord, because I know that if I can just remember those things, the luster and the pull and the power of wealth and work begins to fade in the distance. And we give you praise, glory, and honor for all that you accomplished through your Son, Jesus.
Hi, thank you for watching. If you want to see more great content like this, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to ring the little bell to be notified when we add new videos. Since our founding in 1877, our goal here at Arnhart has been to create God-centered teaching available for everyone, regardless of their status or station. Today, that looks like making trustworthy Bible teaching available to everyone, even if they don't make it to a church building on Sunday. So for more information, check out our website at arnhart.org or join us live on Facebook Sundays at 10:45 a.m. As always, we love you and hope to see you next Sunday.